Beneath the scorching sun of southeastern Turkey, in the barren hills near Sanliurfa, lies a secret that has haunted archaeologists for decades. Gobekli Tepe, a name that translates to Potbelly Hill, has been called the most important archaeological site in the world. But what was discovered in the shadows beneath this ancient temple complex has sent shockwaves through the scientific community, challenging everything we thought we knew about human civilization. The official reports are careful, measured, and conservative. But those who work in the depths of these excavations whisper of something far more extraordinary. They speak of tunnels that shouldn't exist, passages that lead to chambers older than history itself, and artifacts that suggest our ancestors possessed knowledge we are only now beginning to comprehend. It was during a routine ground-penetrating radar survey in 2023 that the first anomaly was detected. The team, led by researchers from the German Archaeological Institute, had been mapping the subsurface structures around Enclosure D, one of the most elaborate circular temples at the site. The radar images showed what appeared to be void spaces, empty chambers beneath the known structures. At first, the team dismissed these readings as natural limestone caves, common in the region. But as they refined their scans, a pattern emerged. These weren't random geological formations. They were too regular, too precisely aligned with the structures above. Someone, or something, had carved these passages with intention and purpose. The decision to excavate was not made lightly. Gobekli Tepe is a UNESCO World Heritage Site, and every inch of soil removed is documented with painstaking precision. But the readings were too compelling to ignore. In the autumn of 2024, a small team began carefully removing the layers of sediment near the base of one of the massive T-shaped pillars in Enclosure D. What they found on the third day of excavation would change the course of archaeological history forever. Approximately 3 meters below the surface, hidden beneath centuries of accumulated debris and deliberately placed backfill, they discovered the entrance. It was a precisely cut opening in the bedrock, no more than 1 meter wide and 1.5 meters high. The edges showed tool marks, the unmistakable signs of human intervention, but these weren't the marks of bronze or iron tools. These cuts were made with something else, something harder, sharper, and far more sophisticated than anything that should have existed 12,000 years ago. The initial exploration of the tunnel was conducted by a single archaeologist, equipped with modern LED lighting and documentation equipment. The passage descended at a gentle angle, approximately 15 degrees, cutting through solid limestone. The walls were smooth, almost polished, showing none of the rough chisel marks typical of ancient stonework. It was as if the rock had been melted or dissolved rather than carved. The air inside was surprisingly fresh, suggesting ventilation shafts or connections to other chambers. After approximately 20 meters, the passage opened into a small antechamber. Here, the team made their second extraordinary discovery. Carved into the walls were symbols, but not the pictographs and animal reliefs found in the temples above. These were different, more abstract, almost mathematical in their precision. Circular patterns intersected with straight lines, creating geometric designs that seemed to pulse with hidden meaning. Some researchers who have seen photographs of these markings compare them to star charts, maps of celestial bodies and their movements. Others suggest they represent something far more fundamental, perhaps the earliest known attempt to express complex mathematical or physical principles in visual form. But it was what lay beyond the antechamber that truly defied explanation. The tunnel continued, splitting into 3 separate passages. The central passage remained level, while the 2 flanking corridors descended more steeply into the earth. The team chose to follow the central route first, documenting every centimeter with high-resolution photography and 3-dimensional scanning. After another 30 meters, they emerged into a chamber that took their breath away. The room was roughly circular, approximately 12 meters in diameter, with a domed ceiling that rose 5 meters at its highest point. But unlike the temples above, which were filled with carved pillars and elaborate reliefs, this chamber was almost bare. At its center stood a single monolithic structure, unlike anything found at Gobekli Tepe or any other known archaeological site from this period. The monolith was roughly 2 meters tall and perfectly cylindrical, carved from a single piece of black stone that appeared to be basalt or possibly obsidian. Its surface was covered in the same geometric patterns found in the antechamber, but here they were three-dimensional, carved in relief with incredible precision. The team's initial analysis suggested the stone had been shaped using techniques that wouldn't be reinvented until the Bronze Age, thousands of years later. But the most disturbing aspect of the monolith wasn't its craftsmanship or its mysterious symbols. It was its age. Initial radiocarbon dating of organic material found at the base of the structure suggested it was at least 14,000 years old, potentially as much as 16,000 years old. This would place it firmly in the Upper Paleolithic period, thousands of years before the construction of the Gobekli Tepe temples above. It predated not just the site itself, but the entire concept of monumental architecture as we understand it. To understand why this discovery is so revolutionary, we need to examine what we thought we knew about human civilization before Göbekli Tepe was discovered. For most of the 20th century, archaeologists believed that complex society began with agriculture. The story went like this. Around 10,000 years ago, humans in the Fertile Crescent learned to domesticate plants and animals. This agricultural revolution allowed people to settle in permanent villages, which grew into towns and eventually cities. Only after establishing these settled communities did humans have the time and resources to build temples and create art. It was a neat, linear progression from hunter-gatherers to farmers to civilization builders. Then, in 1994, German archaeologist Klaus Schmidt began excavating Gobekli Tepe, and this entire timeline collapsed. The site proved that hunter-gatherers, people with no permanent settlements and no domesticated crops or animals, had somehow organized themselves to build massive stone temples decorated with sophisticated artistic reliefs. The circular enclosures, with their T-shaped pillars weighing up to 20 tons each, represented an unprecedented level of social organization and technical skill. Gobekli Tepe pushed back the dawn of monumental architecture by thousands of years and forced archaeologists to reconsider fundamental assumptions about human development. But if the conventional timeline was already shattered by Gobekli Tepe, the discovery of the tunnel complex and its central chamber has obliterated it completely. The chamber beneath Gobekli Tepe, with its precisely carved monolith and advanced geometric designs, suggests that even earlier, perhaps as far back as 16,000 years ago, humans possessed sophisticated knowledge and technical capabilities. We're not talking about simple hunter-gatherers anymore. We're talking about people who understood geometry, astronomy, and possibly physics at a level that wouldn't be matched again until the classical civilizations of Greece and Rome. Some researchers are beginning to use a term that was once confined to the fringes of archaeology: lost civilization. The idea that there was an advanced culture in the deep past, one that possessed knowledge and technology that was subsequently lost, has always been controversial. Mainstream archaeology has long dismissed such theories as pseudoscience, but the evidence beneath Gobekli Tepe is forcing even the most conservative scholars to reconsider. As the excavation team documented the chamber and its mysterious monolith, they brought in specialists in ancient languages and symbolic systems. What these experts found was both fascinating and deeply puzzling. The geometric patterns carved into the stone appeared to follow mathematical principles that were remarkably sophisticated. Several researchers noted that certain patterns seemed to represent the golden ratio, a mathematical constant that appears throughout nature and has been used in architecture and art for thousands of years. But the golden ratio wasn't formally described in mathematical terms until ancient Greece, thousands of years after this monolith was carved. How did its creators know about it? Other patterns seem to map celestial phenomena with remarkable accuracy. One researcher, a specialist in archaeoastronomy, identified what appeared to be representations of the Orion constellation, the Pleiades star cluster, and possibly even the path of the ecliptic, the apparent path of the sun across the sky throughout the year. If these interpretations are correct, the people who created this chamber possessed detailed astronomical knowledge. They understood the movements of celestial bodies well enough to encode them in permanent stone. This raises profound questions about the sophistication of their society. Astronomical knowledge requires sustained observation over many years, probably generations. It requires a system for recording and transmitting information across time. It suggests a culture with specialists, people dedicated to studying the sky rather than constantly hunting and gathering for survival. But perhaps the most intriguing aspect of the symbol system is what some researchers call the connectivity patterns. Certain geometric designs seem to repeat at specific intervals, creating a kind of visual rhythm. When these patterns are mapped and analyzed using modern computer algorithms, they reveal something extraordinary. The symbols appear to encode information in a way that's similar to how modern digital systems store data, using binary patterns of presence and absence, light and dark, carved and smooth. One researcher, speaking off the record, suggested that the monolith might be a kind of information storage device, a stone hard drive created by people living 16,000 years ago. This interpretation remains highly controversial, and most mainstream archaeologists are reluctant to endorse such radical ideas, but the patterns are there, carved into the stone, waiting to be deciphered. While the main team focused on the central chamber and its monolith, a second group began exploring the two flanking passages that branched off from the antechamber. These corridors descended more steeply than the central tunnel, cutting deeper into the bedrock beneath Gobekli Tepe. The eastern passage proved to be relatively short, extending only about 15 meters before ending in a small chamber that appeared to have been used for storage. The team found several stone vessels, perfectly preserved in the dry conditions, along with what appeared to be grinding tools and the remains of organic material that's currently being analyzed. But it was the western passage that yielded the most extraordinary findings. This tunnel extended much farther than the others, descending at a steady angle for more than 50 meters. The walls here showed the same smooth, almost melted appearance as the entrance tunnel, suggesting they were created using the same unknown technique. At intervals along the passage, the team found small alcoves carved into the walls. Each alcove contained a single object, a carved stone artifact that appeared to serve some ritual or symbolic purpose. These objects were unlike anything found in the upper levels of Gobekli Tepe. They were abstract, geometric forms that seemed to have no practical function. Some resembled polyhedra, three-dimensional shapes with multiple flat faces. Others were more organic, with flowing curves and spiral patterns. All were carved with extraordinary precision from various types of stone, including basalt, limestone, and a dark green stone that preliminary analysis suggests might be jade or serpentine. At the end of the western passage, approximately 60 meters below the surface and 70 meters from the original entrance, the tunnel opened into a second large chamber. This room was roughly the same size as the central chamber but laid out differently. Instead of a single central monolith, it contained a ring of 12 smaller pillars, each about 1 meter tall, arranged in a perfect circle around a depression in the floor. The pillars were carved from the same black stone as the central monolith, and they too were covered in geometric patterns. But here, the symbols on each pillar were different, as if each one represented a distinct concept or piece of information. The depression at the center of the pillar circle was approximately 2 meters in diameter and carved to a depth of about half a meter. Its purpose remains unclear, though several theories have been proposed. Some suggest it was used for offerings or rituals. Others think it might have been filled with water, creating a reflecting pool for astronomical observations. A more radical theory, put forward by one researcher who prefers to remain anonymous, suggests it might have been designed to hold some kind of device or mechanism, now long disappeared. As more samples were collected and analyzed, the age of the tunnel complex became increasingly difficult to explain. Multiple radiocarbon dating tests on organic material found in different parts of the structure consistently returned dates between 14,000 and 16,000 years ago. These dates were confirmed by thermoluminescence dating of the stone tools found in the storage chamber and by uranium series dating of calcium carbonate deposits on the tunnel walls. The evidence was overwhelming. The tunnel complex and its chambers were significantly older than the Gobekli Tepe temples built above them. But this created a profound paradox that archaeologists are still struggling to resolve. If the underground chambers were built 16,000 years ago, they predate not just Gobekli Tepe, but essentially all known examples of complex architecture. At that time, Humans across most of the world were living in small, mobile bands of hunter-gatherers. They used stone tools, wore animal skins, and left behind little evidence of their existence beyond scattered campsites and the occasional cave painting. The idea that people living in such conditions could organize themselves to cut precisely aligned tunnels through solid limestone, carve geometric patterns with mathematical precision, and create sophisticated astronomical records seems impossible. Yet the evidence is undeniable. The tunnels exist. The chambers are real. The monolith stands at the center of its circular room, covered in symbols that encode knowledge we're only beginning to understand. Some researchers have suggested that the tunnel complex might have been created by a different culture than the one that built Göbekli Tepe thousands of years later. Perhaps there was an earlier, more advanced society in this region, one that possessed knowledge and capabilities that were lost during some catastrophic event. When later people arrived and began building the temples above, they might have been aware of the ancient structures beneath their feet. They might have even been inspired by them, using the presence of the older chambers as justification for declaring the site sacred. This theory would explain why Gobekli Tepe was chosen as a temple site in the first place. It wasn't selected randomly. It was built on top of something even older, something that was already considered sacred or significant by the people of that time. To understand what might have happened between the construction of the tunnel complex and the building of Gobekli Tepe above, we need to examine a crucial period in Earth's history known as the Younger Dryas. This was a sudden, dramatic cooling event that occurred approximately 12,800 years ago, right in the middle of the time gap between the tunnel complex below and the temples above. For reasons that are still debated, global temperatures plummeted rapidly, returning much of the northern hemisphere to Ice Age conditions. This cold period lasted for approximately 1,200 years before temperatures rapidly increased again around 11,600 years ago. The Younger Dryas had devastating effects on human populations around the world. Archaeological evidence shows that many settlements were abandoned during this period. Population levels dropped dramatically. Cultural complexity decreased as people focused on simple survival rather than art, architecture, or astronomical observation. But the cause of the Younger Dryas remains controversial. Traditional explanations focus on changes in ocean currents and ice sheet dynamics. But in recent years, an alternative theory has gained traction among some researchers. This theory suggests that the Younger Dryas was triggered by a cosmic impact event, possibly a comet or asteroid that exploded in the atmosphere or struck the ice sheets covering North America. Evidence for this impact hypothesis includes elevated levels of platinum and other rare elements in sediments dating to the beginning of the Younger Dryas, widespread deposits of microscopic diamonds that can only form under extreme pressure and temperature, and a layer of carbon-rich material suggesting massive wildfires occurred globally around the same time. If this impact hypothesis is correct, it means that human civilization around 12,800 years ago was struck by a cosmic catastrophe that destroyed much of what had been built and killed massive numbers of people. In the aftermath, survivors would have been focused on basic survival. Knowledge that had been accumulated over centuries or millennia could have been lost in a single generation as the people who held it died without passing it on. This scenario provides a possible explanation for the tunnel complex beneath Gobekli Tepe. Perhaps it was built by a sophisticated culture that existed before the Younger Dryas impact. When the catastrophe struck, this culture was devastated. Their cities, if they had any, were destroyed. Their knowledge was largely lost. But some survivors remained, and some knowledge persisted. When the climate stabilized 11,600 years ago, these survivors and their descendants began rebuilding. They remembered that certain places were sacred, that the hills of southeastern Turkey held significance. When they came to the place we now call Gobekli Tepe, they found the entrance to the ancient tunnels. They recognized the site as holy ground and began building their own temples above the older chambers. In this way, Gobekli Tepe becomes a bridge between two epochs, a monument built by people who were trying to reconnect with knowledge and traditions that had been nearly lost. As the excavation of the tunnel complex continued, the team made another disturbing discovery. Not all of the passages were accessible. In several locations, Particularly around the second chamber with its ring of 12 pillars, the team encountered carefully constructed walls blocking further progress. These weren't natural collapses or accumulations of sediment. They were deliberately built barriers, walls constructed from precisely cut stone blocks that filled the passages completely. Someone had sealed these tunnels intentionally, and they had done so with considerable effort and skill. The sealing walls showed different construction techniques than the carved tunnels themselves. While the tunnels were cut from solid rock with those mysterious smooth walls, the barriers were built using traditional dry stone masonry, carefully fitted blocks held together by friction and weight rather than mortar. This suggested they were added later, possibly by a different group of people than those who originally created the tunnels. Radiocarbon dating of organic material found in the gaps between the stones suggested these barriers were constructed around 10,000 years ago, roughly 2,000 years after the temples above were built. Why would someone go to the effort of sealing these ancient passages? What were they trying to hide or protect? Several theories have emerged among the research team. The most conservative explanation is that the passages were sealed for safety reasons. Perhaps they had become unstable, or perhaps later inhabitants of the site wanted to prevent people from getting lost in the underground maze. A more intriguing theory suggests the passages were sealed to contain something, to keep it from being accessed or removed. This interpretation is supported by the fact that the sealing walls aren't uniform. Some passages were carefully filled with small stones and rubble, creating barriers several meters thick. Others were blocked with single large slabs positioned to allow them to be removed if necessary. It's as if different passages were sealed with different levels of permanence, suggesting different levels of concern about what lay beyond them. The team has identified at least 7 sealed passages branching off from the accessible chambers. Using ground-penetrating radar and other non-invasive techniques, they've determined that these blocked tunnels extend for considerable distances, possibly connecting to other chambers that remain hidden. One passage, located in the far corner of the second chamber, shows radar signatures, suggesting it descends even deeper than the known structures, possibly extending more than 100 meters below the surface. The decision of whether to open these sealed passages has created considerable debate among the researchers and the Turkish authorities who oversee the site. Opening them could reveal extraordinary discoveries, artifacts, and chambers that might rewrite human history even more dramatically than what's already been found. But it could also disturb something that was deliberately sealed away for very good reasons we don't yet understand. Among the objects recovered from the accessible portions of the tunnel complex, several items have proven particularly puzzling to researchers. These artifacts don't fit into our understanding of what was possible for people living 16,000 years ago. In one of the alcoves along the western passage, the team found what can only be described as a lens. It's a piece of transparent crystal, possibly quartz or beryl, that has been ground and polished into a precise convex shape. When held up to light, it focuses the beam, magnifying objects viewed through it. The optical properties of this lens are remarkably sophisticated, comparable to lenses that wouldn't appear in the archaeological record again until the classical period, thousands of years later. The presence of this lens raises profound questions. Creating such an object requires not just technical skill but an understanding of optics, the science of how light behaves when passing through different materials. How did the creators of this lens know that grinding crystal into a particular shape would produce magnification? What did they use it for? Some researchers suggest it might have been used for starting fires by focusing sunlight, a practical application that doesn't require understanding the underlying optical principles. But others point out that the lens is too precisely made for such a simple purpose. Its curve is mathematically exact, suggesting it was created by people who understood geometric optics at an advanced level. In the storage chamber at the end of the eastern passage, the team found something equally perplexing. Among the grinding tools and stone vessels was a small metallic object, badly corroded but still recognizable as a deliberately crafted artifact. Initial analysis suggests it's made primarily of copper with traces of arsenic, a composition that makes it an early form of bronze. But this raises an immediate problem. The Bronze Age doesn't begin in this region until around 5,000 years ago. How could a bronze object be found in a context that's 16,000 years old? Several explanations have been proposed. The most conservative is that the object is a later intrusion, somehow introduced into the chamber long after it was originally created. But the stratigraphy, the layering of sediments, shows no signs of disturbance. The object was found in a sealed context, embedded in deposits that have been undisturbed for millennia. A more radical explanation is that the chronology of metallurgy needs to be completely revised. Perhaps humans learned to work with metals much earlier than we thought, developing these technologies during the sophisticated culture that existed before the Younger Dryas, then losing them during the Catastrophe, only to slowly rediscover metalworking thousands of years later. This theory is controversial, and many archaeologists reject it outright, but the evidence is difficult to dismiss. The object exists, it's made of bronze, and it was found in a context that appears to be 16,000 years old. As researchers have studied the geometric patterns carved throughout the tunnel complex, a remarkable pattern has emerged. Many of the symbols, particularly those in the central chamber and on the pillars in the second chamber, appear to encode astronomical information with extraordinary precision. The most detailed analysis has focused on a series of concentric circles carved into the domed ceiling of the central chamber. These circles are intersected by straight lines radiating from a central point, creating a pattern that resembles a compass rose or star chart. By mapping these lines and comparing them to the positions of stars and constellations as they would have appeared 16,000 years ago, researchers have made a startling discovery. The pattern on the ceiling appears to be a precise map of the night sky as seen from Göbekli Tepe on a specific date. The central point represents the celestial pole, the point in the sky around which all stars appear to rotate. The radiating lines mark the positions of significant stars and the paths of major constellations. But here's what makes this truly extraordinary. Due to a phenomenon called precession, the slow wobble of Earth's axis, the position of the celestial pole changes over time. By calculating where the pole would have been located to match the carved pattern, researchers have determined that the ceiling map represents the sky as it appeared approximately 16,500 years ago. This date aligns perfectly with the radiocarbon dates obtained from organic material in the chamber. But the astronomical encoding doesn't stop with the ceiling. The 12 pillars in the second chamber appear to represent something equally sophisticated. Their positions around the central depression correspond to significant points on the ecliptic, the path the sun takes across the sky throughout the year. Each pillar seems to represent a month, or possibly a zodiacal constellation, creating a calendar system that divides the year into 12 equal parts. This is remarkably similar to calendar systems used by later civilizations, including the Babylonians and Egyptians, who also divided the year into 12 months and the zodiac into 12 signs. Did they inherit this system from the earlier culture that built the tunnels beneath Gobekli Tepe? The sophistication of the astronomical knowledge encoded in these chambers suggests that the culture that created them was not primitive by any measure. They were systematic observers of the sky who understood that celestial patterns repeat over regular cycles. They possessed mathematical skills sufficient to encode complex information in geometric patterns, and they had developed a system for preserving this knowledge in permanent form, carved into stone where it could survive for millennia. All of this points to a level of cultural and intellectual development that shouldn't have existed 16,000 years ago, at least according to our current understanding of human history. As news of the tunnel discovery beneath Gobekli Tepe has spread through the archaeological community, researchers have begun identifying potential connections to other mysterious sites around the world. These connections remain speculative and controversial, but they suggest the possibility of a widespread advanced culture in the deep past, one that left traces across multiple continents. In Egypt, researchers have noted similarities between the geometric patterns found in the Gobekli Tepe tunnels and symbols found in some of the oldest structures in the Nile Valley. The temple complex at Abydos, particularly the enigmatic structure known as the Osirian, features massive blocks of stone and architectural elements that seem older and more sophisticated than the dynastic Egyptian structures built above them. Some archaeologists have long argued that the Osirian might predate the pharaonic period, possibly by thousands of years. Across the Atlantic, the ancient site of Gobekli Tepe in Turkey, located about 35 kilometers from Gobekli Tepe, has revealed similar circular structures with T-shaped pillars, but recent excavations there have also uncovered underground chambers with carved stone pillars and elaborate relief sculptures. While these chambers aren't as deep as those beneath Gobekli Tepe, they demonstrate that the practice of creating underground ritual spaces was widespread in this region during the Neolithic period. Even more intriguing are similarities between the Gobekli Tepe symbols and geometric patterns found at much more distant sites. At Nabda Playa in southern Egypt, a stone circle dating to approximately 7,000 years ago shows astronomical alignments that suggest its builders possessed sophisticated knowledge of celestial movements. The site includes alignments to the summer solstice, sunrise, and possible representations of star patterns, including the Orion constellation. In South America, the megalithic site of Pumapunku in Bolivia features precisely cut stone blocks with complex geometric patterns. While mainstream archaeology dates this site to around 2,000 years ago, some researchers have argued that certain elements might be much older, possibly representing remnants of an earlier culture that was later built upon. The level of precision in the stonework at Pumapunku, particularly the perfectly flat surfaces and precisely drilled holes, has puzzled archaeologists and led to speculation about advanced ancient technologies. Could there be a connection between these widely separated sites? Is it possible that the advanced culture that built the tunnels beneath Gobekli Tepe was part of a global civilization that left traces across multiple continents? Most mainstream archaeologists reject this idea, arguing that similarities between distant sites are more likely the result of independent development or later cultural diffusion rather than evidence of a lost global civilization. As extraordinary as the discoveries beneath Gobekli Tepe are, what's perhaps equally remarkable is how slowly information about them has been released to the public. The initial discovery of the tunnel entrance occurred in late 2024. Yet, as of late 2025, only a handful of academic papers have been published about the findings, and most of these focus on technical details rather than the broader implications of the discovery. This reticence has fueled speculation that authorities are deliberately suppressing information about what's been found beneath the site. Some researchers who have worked on the excavation, speaking anonymously, suggest that certain discoveries are considered too controversial to publicize. They claim that artifacts and evidence that challenge conventional historical narratives too dramatically are being kept from public view until the academic community can develop a framework for explaining them. The Turkish government, which controls access to the site and must approve all research and publications, has been particularly cautious. Officials are aware that Gobekli Tepe is not just an archaeological site, but a major tourist attraction and a source of national pride. Revelations that might be seen as too radical or that might attract unwanted attention from pseudoscience enthusiasts could damage the site's reputation and complicate its management. There's also the question of the sealed passages. If authorities decide to open them, who should be present? What if they contain artifacts or information that contradicts religious or cultural narratives? What if they reveal nothing at all, disappointing those who believe they hold profound secrets? These are not just archaeological questions, but political and social ones as well. Some observers have noted that certain researchers who initially spoke openly about their findings at Gobekli Tepe have suddenly become much more guarded in their public statements. Conference presentations that were scheduled have been canceled. Papers that were submitted to journals have been withdrawn. This pattern suggests that pressure is being applied, whether officially or unofficially, to limit the flow of information about the tunnel complex and what it contains. However, it's important to note that this interpretation is contested. Many archaeologists argue that the slow release of information is simply due to the normal scientific process. Extraordinary claims require extraordinary evidence, and researchers need time to thoroughly analyze their findings before making them public. Rushing to publicize dramatic discoveries before they've been properly studied would be irresponsible and could damage the credibility of the entire project. One of the most fascinating aspects of the Gobekli Tepe mystery is the question of knowledge transmission. If the tunnel complex beneath the site was built by an advanced culture 16,000 years ago, and if much of that culture's knowledge was lost during the Younger Dryas catastrophe, how much information survived, and how was it transmitted to later cultures? Some researchers have proposed what they call the knowledge transfer theory. This idea suggests that survivors of the pre-Younger Dryas civilization became the teachers and sages of the post-catastrophe world. These individuals carried fragments of the old knowledge, astronomical observations, geometric principles, construction techniques, and they passed them on to the hunter-gatherer groups that eventually rebuilt society. In this scenario, the construction of the Gobekli Tepe temples above the ancient tunnels represents an attempt by these later people to honor and preserve the knowledge they had received. They couldn't replicate the technical sophistication of the older structures. They didn't know how to create those mysteriously smooth tunnels or craft precise optical lenses, but they could build impressive stone temples and decorate them with elaborate carvings. The T-shaped pillars that are so characteristic of Gobekli Tepe might themselves be simplified versions of more complex monuments that existed in the earlier civilization. This theory gains some support from the astronomical alignments and geometric precision evident in the surface temples. The builders of these structures clearly possessed sophisticated knowledge, even if they couldn't match the technical capabilities of their predecessors. Where did this knowledge come from? The most logical explanation is that it was inherited from the earlier culture that created the tunnels below. The knowledge transfer theory also helps explain certain puzzling aspects of early civilizations around the world. Why do so many ancient cultures, separated by vast distances, share similar myths of gods or ancestors who came from the sky or across the water to teach humanity the arts of civilization? Why do their temples and monuments incorporate sophisticated astronomical alignments and mathematical principles? Perhaps these myths preserve cultural memories of a time when people who possessed advanced knowledge taught it to others who were rebuilding after a catastrophe. The gods and ancestors of mythology might have been real people, survivors of the pre-Younger Dryas civilization who seemed almost magical to the hunter-gatherers they encountered. Despite the controversies and debates surrounding the tunnel complex, the investigation continues. As of December 2025, research teams are still working to fully document and understand what has already been discovered, while carefully planning potential excavation of the sealed passages. New technologies are being brought to bear on the mystery. High-resolution three-dimensional scanning is creating detailed digital models of every surface in the accessible chambers, allowing researchers around the world to study the geometric patterns and symbols without traveling to the site. Advanced materials analysis using techniques like X-ray fluorescence and neutron activation analysis is revealing the chemical composition of the carved stones and providing clues about where they came from and how they were shaped. Perhaps most excitingly, artificial intelligence and machine learning algorithms are being applied to the symbol systems carved throughout the complex. These programs can identify patterns and relationships that human observers might miss, potentially decoding the meaning of the geometric designs. Early results from these analyses suggest that the symbols are not random or purely decorative. They appear to encode information in systematic ways, using repeating patterns and mathematical relationships. Some researchers believe they may be close to understanding at least part of the message carved into these ancient stones. Meanwhile, exploration continues in the region around Gobekli Tepe. Ground-penetrating radar surveys are being conducted across a wide area, searching for other tunnel systems or buried structures. Several promising anomalies have been identified at nearby sites, including Karahan, Tepe, and Sayburts, suggesting that the tunnel beneath Gobekli Tepe might not be unique, but rather part of a larger network of underground chambers. In the academic world, the discoveries beneath Gobekli Tepe are forcing a re-evaluation of fundamental assumptions about human prehistory. Conferences are being organized to discuss the implications. New research programs are being funded to investigate the possibility of advanced cultures in the deep past. Even conservative scholars who were initially skeptical are beginning to acknowledge that something extraordinary happened in southeastern Turkey during the late Upper Paleolithic period. The evidence is simply too compelling to ignore. But perhaps the most important work is happening in laboratories and universities around the world, where researchers are trying to answer basic questions. Who built the tunnel complex? Where did they come from? What happened to them? And most tantalizingly, what knowledge did they possess that we have only recently begun to rediscover? As we stand at the threshold of what might be the most important archaeological discovery in human history, we're faced with more questions than answers. The tunnel complex beneath Göbekli Tepe has opened a window into a past that we didn't know existed, revealing glimpses of a sophisticated culture that thrived thousands of years before civilization was supposed to begin. But that window is still clouded, and much remains hidden in shadow. What lies beyond the sealed passages that branch off from the known chambers? The ground-penetrating radar shows that these tunnels extend for considerable distances, possibly connecting to other chambers or even to the surface at distant locations. Until these passages are opened, we can only speculate about what they might contain. More artifacts that challenge our understanding of ancient technology? Written records that might tell us who these people were and what happened to them? Or perhaps something even more extraordinary that we can't yet imagine? Why was the site chosen for the temple complex, built thousands of years later? Was it simply because the earlier tunnels were discovered by later people who recognized them as sacred? Or was there continuity of knowledge, a chain of tradition that preserved the memory of what lay beneath the hill? The astronomical alignments of both the tunnels and the later temples suggest that certain kinds of knowledge persisted across the millennia, passed down through oral tradition or perhaps through a priestly class that maintained ancient secrets. What caused the advanced culture that built the tunnels to disappear? The Younger Dryas impact hypothesis provides one possible explanation, suggesting that a cosmic catastrophe devastated human populations around 12,800 years ago. But even if this theory is correct, it raises further questions. How advanced was the civilization that existed before this catastrophe? What other achievements might they have accomplished? And how much knowledge was irretrievably lost when their society collapsed? Perhaps the deepest question is this: what does the discovery of the tunnel complex mean for our understanding of ourselves and our place in history? For most of human existence, we've told ourselves a comforting story about progress, a steady march from primitive beginnings to modern sophistication. But Gobekli Tepe, and especially the tunnel complex beneath it, suggests that history might be more complicated than that. Perhaps advanced knowledge and sophisticated culture emerged much earlier than we thought, only to be lost and painstakingly rediscovered over millennia. Perhaps we are not the first humans to look at the stars and try to understand our place in the cosmos. Among the most enigmatic aspects of the tunnel complex are certain symbols that appear repeatedly throughout the chambers, but particularly concentrated near the sealed passages. These markings are different from the geometric patterns and astronomical charts that dominate other areas. They're more pictographic, almost representational, and their placement suggests they might have served as warnings. One symbol that appears multiple times shows what looks like a circle with radiating lines, similar to how ancient cultures often represented the sun. But in these carvings, the sun is positioned low on the horizon, and above it are falling objects, dots or small circles, that seem to rain down from the sky. Below the horizon line are representations of what might be mountains or waves, and scattered among them are smaller shapes that could represent buildings or structures. The scene appears to depict some kind of catastrophe, possibly the very event that destroyed the civilization that built these tunnels. Another recurring symbol is more abstract but equally disturbing. It shows concentric circles, like ripples spreading outward from a central point, intersected by a jagged line that cuts through them diagonally. Some researchers interpret this as representing an impact or explosion, with the ripples showing the spreading effects of the event. This symbol appears most frequently near the entrances to the sealed passages, almost as if it's meant to warn future visitors about what lies beyond. Perhaps most intriguingly, there are symbols that seem to represent water. These show wavy horizontal lines, sometimes rising upward like a flood, sometimes falling like rain. In several locations, these water symbols are combined with the impact and catastrophe symbols, suggesting a connection between them. This has led some researchers to propose that the pre-Younger Dryas civilization was destroyed not just by a cosmic impact, but by the secondary effects it triggered: massive floods caused by melting ice sheets, tsunamis, and climate chaos. If these interpretations are correct, then the tunnel complex might be more than just an astronomical observatory or ritual center. It might be a warning, a message carved in stone by people who had witnessed or survived an apocalyptic event and wanted to ensure that future generations would remember what had happened. They encoded their knowledge in geometric patterns and astronomical charts so that it might survive the catastrophe they saw coming, and they sealed certain passages, perhaps containing more explicit warnings or detailed information, to be opened only when humanity had developed enough to understand what they were being told. This interpretation raises profound questions about the responsibility that comes with archaeological discovery. If the sealed passages do contain warnings about cosmic catastrophes or other existential threats, do we have an obligation to open them and learn what they contain? Or would doing so risk releasing information that might cause panic or be misused? The discovery beneath Gobekli Tepe is not just about understanding the past. It has profound implications for how we think about the present and future. If a sophisticated civilization existed 16,000 years ago and was destroyed by a cosmic catastrophe, it suggests that such events are not just theoretical possibilities, but real threats that have actually occurred in human history. This lends urgency to modern efforts to detect and potentially deflect asteroids and comets that might be on collision courses with Earth. The knowledge encoded in the tunnel complex, particularly the astronomical charts and geometric patterns, might contain information that's still relevant today. Some researchers are exploring whether the star positions and celestial alignments recorded in the chambers could help us understand long-term cycles in Earth's cosmic environment, patterns that might predict future impact, threats, or climate shifts. There's also the question of lost knowledge more broadly. If the pre-Younger Dryas civilization possessed advanced understanding of mathematics, astronomy, and possibly other sciences, and if much of that knowledge was lost during the catastrophe, what might we learn by studying what survived? Could the geometric patterns carved into the tunnel walls contain mathematical principles or physical insights that we've overlooked in our own scientific development? Some researchers are taking this possibility seriously, applying modern analytical techniques to the ancient symbols in hopes of discovering forgotten knowledge. The psychological and philosophical implications are equally significant. The standard narrative of human history, the one taught in schools and universities around the world, assumes that we are the pinnacle of human achievement, that no previous culture has matched our technological and scientific accomplishments. But what if that's wrong? What if we're actually engaged in the process of rediscovering knowledge that was achieved once before and then lost? This possibility should inspire both humility and hope. Humility because it reminds us that our achievements are not guaranteed to last, that civilization is fragile and knowledge can be lost. Hope because it demonstrates that even after catastrophic destruction, even after knowledge is lost and societies collapse, humans have the capacity to rebuild and rediscover. The people who built the temples of Gobekli Tepe above the ancient tunnels were doing exactly that, reaching back toward knowledge and capabilities that had been lost, trying to reconnect with a wisdom they intuited but couldn't fully grasp. In a sense, we're continuing that same process today, standing in those ancient chambers, studying those carved symbols, and trying to understand what our distant ancestors knew. Despite the compelling evidence from the tunnel complex, the discoveries have faced significant resistance from portions of the archaeological establishment. This resistance stems partly from the radical nature of the claims, and partly from the way archaeology as a discipline has developed over the past century. For generations, archaeologists have worked to distinguish their field from pseudoscience and speculation, establishing rigorous standards of evidence and interpretation. This laudable goal has sometimes led to an overly conservative approach that's slow to accept evidence that challenges established narratives. The tunnel complex beneath Gobekli Tepe presents exactly this kind of challenge. The evidence suggests that a sophisticated, possibly advanced civilization existed thousands of years before such cultures were supposed to be possible. This conflicts with deeply held assumptions about human development and the progression of civilization. As a result, some archaeologists have been quick to propose alternative explanations that preserve the conventional timeline, even when these alternatives require complex chains of reasoning or ignore certain evidence. For example, some researchers have suggested that the tunnel complex might actually be much younger than the radiocarbon dates indicate, proposing that the organic material dated was contaminated by older carbon from the surrounding rock. But this explanation fails to account for the multiple independent dating methods that all converge on the same approximate age range. Others have argued that while the tunnels might be old, they were probably natural caves that were merely modified by humans rather than being entirely artificial structures. But detailed geological analysis shows no evidence of natural cave formation in the rock layers where the tunnels exist. The smoothness of the tunnel walls and the precision of the chambers are inconsistent with natural processes. Perhaps the most dismissive response has come from archaeologists who simply refuse to engage with the evidence, arguing that extraordinary claims require extraordinary proof and that until every possible alternative explanation has been exhausted, the radical interpretation should be rejected. While this skepticism is healthy in principle, it can become an excuse for ignoring evidence that doesn't fit comfortable narratives. The resistance is particularly strong when it comes to the implications of the discovery. Accepting that an advanced culture existed 16,000 years ago opens the door to reconsidering other controversial claims and sites around the world. It lends credibility to theories about lost civilizations that have long been relegated to the fringes of archaeology. This makes many mainstream archaeologists uncomfortable as they fear it might validate pseudoscientific claims or encourage treasure hunters and amateur theorists to cause damage at archaeological sites. But this resistance may be softening. As more evidence accumulates and as younger archaeologists less invested in defending the old paradigm enter the field, there's growing acceptance that something extraordinary was happening in southeastern Turkey during the late Upper Paleolithic. The debate is shifting from whether advanced culture existed at this time to questions about its extent, its nature, and what happened to it. For those who have had the privilege of visiting the tunnel complex, the experience is described as overwhelming and almost spiritual. The journey begins at the entrance in Enclosure D, where a modern metal staircase has been installed to provide safe access to the tunnel mouth. As you descend into the earth, the temperature drops noticeably, and the sounds of the surface world fade away. The LED lighting installed by the excavation team casts dramatic shadows on the smooth tunnel walls, highlighting their unusual surface texture. Walking through these passages, knowing that they were carved 16,000 years ago by people we know almost nothing about, induces a profound sense of temporal vertigo. The smooth walls seem to absorb sound, creating an almost eerie silence broken only by the soft footsteps of visitors and the occasional drip of water from the ceiling. When you emerge into the central chamber and see the black monolith standing at its center, the emotional impact is immediate. The stone seems to draw your attention, pulling your gaze to the intricate geometric patterns that cover its surface. Under the artificial lighting, these patterns seem almost to move, creating the illusion of depth and motion that's both mesmerizing and slightly unsettling. Visitors report feeling a connection to the past that's more immediate and visceral than anything they've experienced at other archaeological sites. There's something about standing in a space that was carved out of solid rock thousands of years before the pyramids were built, looking at symbols that encode knowledge we're only beginning to understand, that fundamentally shifts your perspective on history and human achievement. The second chamber, with its ring of 12 pillars surrounding the central depression, evokes a different emotion. Where the central chamber feels contemplative and focused, this space feels ceremonial. It's easy to imagine groups of people gathered here in the distant past, conducting rituals or making astronomical observations through the opening above. The alcoves along the western passage, each containing its precisely carved artifact, feel like a museum from another world. The objects are beautiful in their abstract geometric perfection, but they're also utterly mysterious. Without labels or explanations, without context or cultural reference points, they remain enigmatic, teasing us with the possibility of meaning we can't quite grasp. Many visitors report that their experience in the tunnels changes how they think about ancient history and human potential. The sophistication evident in every carved surface, every precisely placed symbol, every carefully constructed chamber challenges the assumption that ancient people were primitive or less capable than we are. These were humans with intelligence and creativity equal to our own, who used the materials and knowledge available to them to create something extraordinary. In a very real sense, Standing in those chambers puts you in direct contact with your distant ancestors, separated by 10 millennia, but connected by shared humanity. As we look to the future, several crucial decisions need to be made about the tunnel complex and how research should proceed. The most pressing question is whether to open the sealed passages. This decision involves weighing the potential for extraordinary discoveries against the risks of disturbing what was deliberately closed off. The Turkish authorities, in consultation with international archaeological experts, are developing a protocol for how this should be approached. Any opening of sealed passages will need to be done with extreme care, using remote sensing and robotic exploration first to assess what lies beyond before any human entry is attempted. This cautious approach might seem frustrating to those eager for dramatic discoveries, but it's necessary to protect both the integrity of the site and the safety of researchers. We only get one chance to excavate these chambers properly. Once disturbed, the archaeological context can never be restored. Beyond the immediate site, there's a growing movement to expand the search for similar structures in the region and potentially around the world. If the tunnel complex beneath Gobekli Tepe was built by a sophisticated culture, they probably created other sites as well. Systematic surveys using modern remote sensing technology could identify other buried structures without the need for excavation. Satellite imagery, ground-penetrating radar, and even airborne laser scanning are being employed to search for anomalies that might indicate buried chambers or structures. There's also the question of how to present these discoveries to the public. The findings from Gobekli Tepe challenge conventional narratives about human history in ways that can be difficult to communicate without either sensationalizing them or drowning in technical details. Museums and educational institutions are grappling with how to incorporate this new understanding into their presentations of human prehistory. Some researchers are advocating for a complete rewriting of textbooks and museum exhibits to reflect the new timeline of human development suggested by Gobekli Tepe and its tunnel complex. Others prefer a more gradual approach, slowly incorporating new findings as they become better understood and more widely accepted. Perhaps most importantly, the discoveries beneath Gobekli Tepe remind us that there's still so much we don't know about our past. After centuries of archaeological research, after millions of artifacts excavated and analyzed, we can still be surprised by discoveries that fundamentally change our understanding of human history. This should inspire both humility about what we think we know and excitement about what remains to be discovered. Every excavation, every analysis, every new application of technology to ancient sites has the potential to reveal something unexpected. The past is not a closed book, but an ongoing mystery that we're only beginning to unravel. As this exploration of the tunnel complex beneath Gobekli Tepe draws to a close, we return to where we began, standing at the threshold of a profound mystery. The chambers have been mapped, the artifacts cataloged, the symbols documented and analyzed. But in many ways, we're no closer to truly understanding what this place was or what it meant to the people who created it 16,000 years ago. The geometric patterns carved into stone might be astronomical charts, mathematical proofs, religious symbols, or something entirely different that we lack the cultural context to recognize. The monolith at the center of the first chamber might be a monument, a calendar, an information storage device, or simply an expression of artistic vision from a mind separated from ours by hundreds of generations. The sealed passages might contain the answers to all our questions, or they might hold only more mysteries, chambers upon chambers descending into the earth, each one raising new questions about who built them and why. But perhaps this uncertainty, this inability to fully grasp what we've found, is itself meaningful. It reminds us that the people who lived 16,000 years ago were not simple or primitive. They were humans like us, capable of complex thought and sophisticated creation, but they lived in a world so different from ours that we struggle to understand their motivations and meanings. The symbols they carved might have been as clear and obvious to them as written language is to us, but lacking their cultural context, we see only beautiful patterns whose significance eludes us. Some mysteries, perhaps, are meant to remain unsolved, at least for now. The tunnel complex has already fundamentally changed our understanding of human history. It has pushed back the dawn of civilization by thousands of years and revealed that our ancestors possessed capabilities we never imagined. But it has also shown us how much we still don't know, how many questions remain unanswered about where we came from and how we became what we are. As research continues, as new technologies are applied to old mysteries, as the sealed passages are eventually opened and their secrets revealed, we may come closer to understanding what happened beneath Göbekli Tepe 16,000 years ago. But we may never fully solve the mystery. And perhaps that's appropriate. The tunnel complex stands as a monument to human achievement, to the drive to create and to know that has characterized our species throughout its existence. But it also stands as a reminder of human fragility, of how knowledge can be lost and civilizations can fall, leaving behind only enigmatic traces for future generations to puzzle over. The people who carved those tunnels knew things we don't. They saw the world in ways we can only dimly comprehend. They left us a message, encoded in stone and symbol, but we're still learning how to read it. That process of learning, of slowly deciphering the meaning in those ancient patterns, is perhaps the most important work we can do, not just because it tells us about our past, but because it might contain warnings or wisdom relevant to our future. As you reflect on what you've learned about the hidden chambers beneath Gobekli Tepe, consider this. What if there are other sites like this, still undiscovered, buried beneath deserts or forests or even underwater on submerged coastlines? What if the tunnel complex is just one piece of a much larger puzzle, fragments of a lost world scattered across the globe, waiting to be found? And what if the knowledge encoded in these ancient sites, knowledge about astronomy and mathematics and cosmic catastrophes, is not just historical curiosity, but information we need for our own survival? The past might be trying to tell us something. The question is whether we're ready to listen. The tunnels beneath Gobekli Tepe remain there, cutting through solid limestone, their smooth walls reflecting the light of our modern lamps, much as they once reflected the light of ancient torches. The monolith stands in its circular chamber, covered in patterns that encode meaning we're only beginning to grasp. The sealed passages wait in darkness, holding secrets that might transform our understanding of who we are and where we came from. And somewhere, perhaps, in other locations we haven't yet discovered, other chambers lie hidden, other messages carved in stone, waiting for the day when we're finally ready to understand what our ancestors were trying to tell us across the vast gulf of time that separates their world from ours. The mystery continues, and the search for answers goes on.